the compliments first. L.A. Divine is a fantastic record, again, which is something
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's something you guys do over and over. I'm listening to it, and I was sort of wondering, as I listened to the characters, and this isn't exactly a new thing for your writing, but it seems like a lot of these characters are in a bad spot, maybe to the point of desperation.
Yeah, I mean, I always think that's where things get most interesting, in that desperate place. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it is interesting to say, like, whether it's in a bad way, I think that in a lot of ways, a lot of that good, that moment of crisis, whether like spiritual or physical or whatever, that like, you do have the opportunity to kind of, rise out of it, to kind of transcend, and those moments are actually kind of, of desperation can kind of be good moments as well.
You give your characters a fighting chance. That's nice of you.
Oh, yeah. They're not doomed.
I always kind of felt that about myself, too. It is those moments artistically when your back's up against the wall that it seems to, that's when the best opportunities end up happening.
Yeah, it's there's one book that I read during the making of this record that was a writer called Richard Rohr. He wrote a book called Falling Upward that is actually very much about that. It's about like kind of how starting with kind of like Homer and the Iliad and the idea of like, the journey, even after he comes home from his great life's journey, and he kind of has this amazing experience of victory and winning his battles and everything, and that it's that moment when you come home and you kind of get depressed and you go, what now? What is my, like, what's my purpose? What's my journey now? That's kind of when it starts. And I thought, man, that is a really, like, and he kind of goes on to show how, like, in the Western world, we're very ill-equipped to understand that, like, that it is those moments of desperation and crisis that we're defined by, and that they are, as much a gift as a struggle. And so I love that stuff.
It's a very human thing. In fact, I think about some of the lyrics, and you've got one that has the line, "I don't feel invincible," and yet it comes right after one that sounds like it's written about a superhero. Like,
yeah, I mean, I definitely think anybody watching the news, always, but especially in the last year, and especially with, shootings, that there's just a sense of like, man, and part of it's age, part of it's for me, that everybody gets to that point in their life when they don't feel invincible anymore, but also just in general, I think there's just a sense where people are like, part of the record too, I think the concept is that living in LA, there it is kind of, I mean, and let's see, how do I say this? I think there's a universal thing. I think in a lot of cities in the world, you hear about violence and you go, oh, that's over there. That would never happen here. But it's a strange thing, because once there's and then once in a while you hear about something terrible, a tragedy in a city that you go, oh wait, but that's just a regular city, or that's my city, that is, my city away from home or something. And then it just has that different face on it. And I think, LA is funny because it projects its own, it has a universally understood myth about itself as being, kind of, movie-like and sort of maybe above the possibility of certain tragedy happening, especially on like a kind of a terror level or something. But yeah, so I think that's kind of definitely going on there in that song, Invincible.
Well, it seems like what you're talking about leads into especially a Wilshire Protest, which is a really powerful moment of this record, with sort of the poem over the top. But I'd also be curious where the music come from in that, because the music's really interesting, what's going on there.
Yeah, there was, there's three kind of like vignettes on the record, and little like kind of, I thought of it in the way of like, it's funny, it's almost finished with the record, and I was kind of just at home by myself working on these songs that I guess I felt like, almost like in a hip hop record, how like a skit can like inform kind of like just the vibe and the culture of a record in a way that almost songs can't quite get that close. And so, yeah, it just became a cool way to be like, the Wilshire Protest was something that it was the first post-election kind of LA protest, and I got to go to and just kind of write from a perspective of just like almost like a journalist, an observer, and think about it in the context of LA and how kind of separated we are from each other. And yeah, it was fun to create all three of those songs just kind of after the record and think about, what are the songs trying to say that, like, these kind of little vignettes can even go further on.
I love the way they tied it together. And then, with you guys being part of the 30 Days, 30 Songs, I mean, the way you're, the songwriting approach right now is, I love it. I love what you're doing. And it should note, too, that even with all these things that you're talking about, like the music almost contradicts all of that, because the music is always so upbeat and joyful. And it sounds like you guys, it sounds like one of those lines you hear during the press run for anybody, but it actually sounds like you guys are having even more fun than usual in all this. So
yeah, definitely. I really think that, to have 6 records, and I think, there's in between phases, there's always going to be like growing pains and finding out who you are. I think, the song First and how well it did on the last record and how it definitely gave me a kind of a renewed sense of like, oh, okay, we're not just kind of struggling to keep our head above water here. Like there's something that kind of came full circle, the sound of the first record, even that, and the kind of simplicity of, we really wrote around the piano this time around, and I think that really helped have, for me, just a lot of freedom, especially in the early days, the first few records, I didn't want to be behind the piano with every song, and, after the 4th record, we had Matt Schwartz join, and he, as a piano player, he can play everything, so I don't have to be thinking about that anymore. I can just kind of think about, making the piano the center, but not also having to be behind it every night. So I can be out front, and those are the little things that actually have a huge effect on the record for a band like us that does come from kind of like primarily a touring is where we spend a lot of our time. So yeah, it is definitely like, it's a lot of years of learning about your strengths, and I'm just so happy to keep doing it, and it is a really fun phase right now.
Yeah, well, I love it, and I thank you for the music, and it's nice to talk to you again, Nate. Thanks again for the conversation today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's very encouraging. Thank you.
No problem. Take care, man.
Okay, you too.
Bye. Bye.